Well, hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name's Jane and today I'm going to be talking about the guilt and shame that we often have around projects that we start but never get round to finishing. And I'm going to question whether the finishing of all of our projects is actually the point of them. So I have had a small business for 25 years, or rather a string of small businesses. And for most of that time, I have worked on my own. So I have done everything in the business, Marketing department, that was me. Financial department, that was me. Research and development, that was definitely me. Now, the research and development department in any business, whether that's a big tech business or whether it's somebody like me who was growing cut flowers, it is vital. It is the part of the business that drives innovation, keeps you going, stops you stagnating, and will make the business continue in kind of like a lively way into the future. So when I had a business where I was growing cut flowers here in Scotland, and using them, I was also a florist, so I did wedding flowers and bouquets, all of that kind of thing. A lot of my work was actually trying things out. So that might be buying seeds or bulbs, seeing how they grew here, seeing how they lasted in the vase, whether people actually liked them, would want to buy them, or it could be things like getting lots of box designs to see what the best way would be for sending things by post. Now, a lot of those things were projects that I started and that I then abandoned because I could see that they weren't working. I didn't like the effects. They were going to be too expensive. Whatever reason, being a solo research and development department means that you spend your whole time starting projects, only a small fraction of which ever get to the end. And yet, that is the creative heart of the business. Without all of those projects that were started and then stopped, there would be no creativity in the business, because if you only start things that you know you're going to finish, you are cutting out so much creativity. And if we think about it, if we think of somebody who has a creative career, so maybe they are an engineer or a product designer or an architect, we know that they spend a lot of their time starting things, working out the issues, using it as a process thing, none of which is lost because they carry on that information, that inspiration onto their next project, which might get finished. Or if we think about a more kind of like stereotypical creatives, like artists, whether they are painters or sculptors or poets, writers, we do not expect that everything that somebody starts is going to make it to the finish line. And in fact, it is the abandonment of many of these projects that actually makes the things that go to the end more creative. It is the stopping of the things that are not going to work, that were trial runs, that makes the final things much more powerful. There is a writer called Seth Godin, one of my favourite business writers, massive influence on the way that I run my businesses. And he wrote a book called The Dip, which is kind of about this in business. And it's about where do people give up on projects and where should you give up on projects. And his feeling is that the giving up on projects is so much better if you do it near the beginning. You know, you try something, you really push at it, you work out whether you like it, whether it's going to work and things, and then you abandon it. And he sees that abandoning of things in a timely manner as very, very beneficial. So why is it when we're talking about our own creative lives that we see projects that we don't finish as a great failure, and worse than that, as something that we feel guilt and shame about? Because I feel in so many walks of life, this idea that we need to finish everything before we can move on to something else is not a good trait. You know, it keeps people stuck in jobs that are not for them. It stops them quitting and flying and finding what they were meant to do. It makes us feel guilty about the things that we have started, like books. You know, you start a book. Some people feel that every book you start, you should finish, even though in reality that means that there is somewhere out there a book that you would love, which you're not going to have time to read because you are doggedly finishing every single book that you start. And so it is, I believe, with unfinished projects. Now, that does not mean that there is not a problem in filling your house with unfinished projects. First problem is, I think, that as soon as you look at them, there is a tendency to feel bad, to feel that guilt, to feel that shame, and they should come nowhere near your creativity. They are the things that kill creativity. So I do believe that if you have unfinished projects that you definitely will not revive, you have to find a way of getting them out of your space, whether that is handing them on to somebody else, whether that is taking them down into their kind of like parts and starting again. But aside from that, I think that there are many different reasons that projects are abandoned, which doesn't put them into that here there is no hope for this project kind of category. And the first one is to do with our capitalist society. The way that we have set up society as this capitalist, toxic, consumerist society is that all businesses who are selling you something have it built in that they need to scale. So it's no point just selling you one thing. You know, we can't just sell you this cup and then that's you. You've got your cup for the rest of time. Quite happy with your cup. As long as it doesn't break, you will use that cup. It's a beautiful cup, make you very happy. Businesses, in the way that we have set up society, cannot do that. They have to sell you another cup, or maybe something to go with the cup. And the way that they do that is by making you doubt that the cup that you have is adequate, perfect, lovely. This cup that you have been so pleased with, 3 weeks down the line after you've bought it, they bring out new versions, new colours, they photograph it beautiful ways. They get people talking about it on Instagram and TikTok. Makes you feel, oh, I bought this cup, but actually I wonder whether I should have bought that cup. And the idea is that you buy that cup and then you've got 2 cups, and so on and so on and so on. And this happens even with really lovely businesses because it is systemic. There are hardly any businesses that will not try and resell you exactly what you've bought. And this is often the case with knitting patterns, craft kits, fabric, anything that you are creating. You will have bought something. So you saw a knitting pattern on Instagram, you bought all of the wool for it, you're going to be doing this, you think, brilliant. 3 weeks later, same designer brings out another knitting pattern. And of course, they're having to sell that. So they've taken beautiful photos. They've got everybody speaking about it. They've got all their test knitters. It's different. You're sitting with your knitting pattern thinking, oh, well, this is now out of date. This is last year's. I can't see that it's as nice as this new one. And that saps your energy and can lead to you buying the next one because it's really lovely and you think you might make it. But this is how, in many cases, unfinished projects line up. And what I would say is, if this happened to you, and I know in the studio we have people who've got, several kits by one person because they've bought all of them every time a new one has come out, and they want to have it, but doing that almost guarantees that you're not going to finish them. Right. So my solution to this now, apart from coming off Instagram, is when I have bought something from a maker, I actually now unsubscribe from their mailing list until I have finished that item. And I know that that sounds bizarre and it sounds borderline nasty, but that is a way that I can concentrate on this one thing that I have bought. And I do the same with, if I have bought a duvet cover or a mug, I'm likely to unsubscribe from that because I don't want clothes. I don't want the images and just that nagging thing in my head that I could move on to something else. The next thing that I want you to think about with your works in progress is there is this psychological thing that as you get near to the end of a project, there is something that starts nagging you just to stop it and move on. Now, I know this. I'm so inflicted by this particular thing. At the moment, I'm knitting a cardigan onto the second sleeve, and yet all I can think about is the project that I'm moving on to next. It would be very, very easy just to stop that halfway through the sleeve and move on to the next project. Socks. Some people find that they can only knit one sock because the second sock, they've lost interest. They've already solved all of the things in the pattern. And that's what brings them. This is the heart of things. It's often the curiosity and the working out and the creativity that draw us to these projects. So sometimes with socks, you've done all of that in the first sock, and the second sock or the second sleeve, you're going over new things. And if that is a real problem for you, and I do know people who have dozens of single socks, if you don't want every day to be an odd sock day, which would be one solution, I would say see about starting knitting your socks in pairs as you go along, and whether that solves it. But that's kind of by the by. But be aware that this is something that happens to so many people. The trick that I am now trying is that I will allow myself to do swatches and samples for the next project while I am working on my existing project. This has two benefits. One, I'm very bad at doing swatches. That excitement and enthusiasm of a new project often makes me skip the swatch thing together. But also it gives me some kind of structure. It gives me something to think about. It gives me some curiosity, but I am still working on my original project 95% of the time until it's finished, and then I am ready to go on to the next one. Another thing that can really contribute to unfinished works is when you make a mistake. Now, I find in life that there is nothing saps my energy as immediately as doing something wrong. Now, this can be, sending out an email with the wrong link in it. Suddenly I think, I'm so exhausted now. But it can also be knitting 2 left sides of a cardigan, or cutting out something incorrectly. It saps my energy, and the reason for that, of course, is that your brain is going, oh, well, no wonder you made a mistake. Look how tired you are, Jane. But it's not helpful. And if, when I have made a mistake in something that I am making, if at that point I put it into a project bag and put it away, I can 100% guarantee that is never, ever being finished, even though the mistake is often minor. I was talking to my dentist last week about this. She's making a quilt for one of her children, and she cut it all out, and then she realised that one of the fabrics, which is a check, she had cut slightly squint. And she didn't know what to do, because she's got to make the decision, does she replace the fabric or does she go with that fabric? So she has just packed it all into a bag and put it away to come back to. And I said, no, you've got to make your decision. And my opinion on this is, you've got to scrap that fabric that you cut out wrong, because otherwise you'll make the quilt and you'll hate it, because every time you see it, you'll see that the fabric is slightly squint. You need to take that out of your bag so that when you're going back in, you're starting afresh. Right? You're starting afresh with your new fabric. And this is why I think that anytime anything goes wrong, so for example, knitting 2 left sides to a cardigan, before I abandon it, I now frog all of that yarn, so that when I'm going back to the project, it is something that is unfinished, yes, but it doesn't have a problem in with it. So that would be one of my tips. And that brings us on to the final bit of this, and this is to acknowledge that the one issue with unfinished things is that you have spent money, particularly money and time, but particularly money on the supplies. And there are 2 ways of looking at this, and I think one is for the time and some of the supplies. They have been something that has fostered your creativity, so they are not wasted. You have learned a lot, you've experimented, you've enjoyed doing it. But that still leaves us with the sort of like physical supplies, the yarn that isn't being used, the fabric that isn't being used. And I would say that when we buy something, I feel we also have a responsibility to sort out its kind of end of life, to make sure that it is passed on to somebody else. And in some ways I feel that there should be almost a payment at the end, that we should have some kind of deposit system where you only get a certain amount of your money back if you have either finished the item or you have rehomed all of the supplies. There has to be something in society that makes it more difficult to just hoard, or whether that is joyfully or whether it's in a state of guilt. So what I would say is, if you know you're not going back to a project, if it is properly abandoned, if it didn't turn out as you want it, then either frog or sort out your things back to the raw materials and hand them on to somebody who actually wants them. And that may not be a charity shop. We can't just keep dumping stuff on charity shops, though it might be if you've got a lot of very nice yarn you're handing over. There are plenty groups online where people can swap things. But ensure that that is done regularly, because otherwise we come back to the very beginning of this, where every time you open your craft cupboard, it is full of things that are just making you feel bad, making you feel guilty. And you do not want guilt or shame anywhere near your creativity. So clean them out, pass them on, and get creating. So until next week, bye bye.